Hello, hello. If you're on the East
Hello.
Coast, good afternoon. If you're on the West Coast, good morning. Greetings from gloomy Reno, Nevada. My name is Michael Moberly, project manager over here at Lush Life and Portland Cocktail Week. Today, we have our most requested class. We did a version of this class before. We're bringing it back and updating it a little bit, changed the title around a little bit. But today, I'm here with Nickel Morris. He is the co-owner of Expo in Louisville and an expert in extending the life of single ingredients and the magic of citrus. Today, we're going to learn how to quadruple your juice yields, quadruple your flavor, double your shelf life, and half the cost, which is like basic magic, right? Like that's basically some necromancy in some degree. And then without any kitchen toys, which is the cool part about that. But before we get into it, I need everyone watching to do a few things for me. First, like us on Facebook. That's the best way to watch our stuff. You can actually set an alert so every time we have a class, it'll pop up and be like, hey, reminder, you should watch this cool class. The other thing is to subscribe to our channel on YouTube. Our YouTube channel is where everything lives forever. Same thing on our Facebook. But that way, if you're somebody like me who doom scrolls through YouTube, you can watch our cool classes. And then you can follow us on Instagram. Our Instagram is doing all kinds of stuff. We got cool contests coming up where we're doing a lot more interactive things. So make sure you're taking a look there. And if you're watching this, please make sure you ask questions. I'll be bopping in and asking Nickel all the questions that you put in there. So this is stuff that people want to know more about. So please feel free to ask all the questions in the world. I'm here to facilitate those. But let's jump right in to the magic of what you're great at, these non-citrus citruses.
Well, hey, easy with that term now. Sorry. Hi, Mike. Thank you for the fantastic intro. Hi, everybody. I'm Nickel. I've done a lot of things in my career, but the thing that I've focused on for the longest, without question, is making the smallest footprint that I can. And it's not always been, while, terms like sustainability currently are they're on the tip of a lot of people's tongues. It hasn't always been how I got here. How I got here is sort of a longer story of utility. And I want to tell it a little bit because it gives a little bit of context. What I've learned, as you mentioned at the beginning of this, we did this about a year ago, towards the big, the beginning of all the online stuff, and it was really fun. And since then, we've had the opportunity to practically use this for quite a long time. At that point, we'd used it for a few months in its final form. This is something that I've been working on for, 6, almost 7 years. And in some different form or another, it's always been behind my bar in my program. And we now have a really good understanding of how to use it, where it shines, what its strengths are, and also the versatility it might have otherwise. When we taught the class at the beginning, a year ago, I was talking about lemon and lime. I'm going to talk about orange and grapefruit and some other things today as well. I've been able to make some progress on those things, but the lemon and lime has come a little different as well. So to start with how I got here, Oleo Citrate is a technique. Most of the people watching this are probably familiar with the term oleosaccharum, but if you're not, that's sort of what we used to use to make syrups for punches. You take sugar, you lay it on citrus peels or other things, cucumbers, pomegranate seeds, lots of things that have a fluid, and that sugar will absorb it. It'll pull it out. For years, I had wanted to try to find a way to, it started with kegs. It all started with kegs. I was kegging cocktails, and I had a pretty large keg cocktail program. And I had started using a type of carbonation that's now a little more common in the industry, but myself and Mark Weisberg were using it with road soda. And it's an aeration stone that you use to aerate kelp if you're going to grow kelp or spirulina, something like that. These are like 1 micron. This is impossibly small, but it creates fantastic bubbles. The problem with that is even the apparent oxidant pulp that we have in fine strain juice, what you see when you take a full bottle of lemon juice and hold it up. The reason it's opaque, well, that stuff is bigger than a micron, which means that it'll clog that little stone. And because we were building those kegs and we were dropping those in and taking them out to clean them so frequently, we really needed a better solution. And I've been using my immersion circulator to sort of eliminate plant matter out of my syrups and infusions for a couple of years at that point. I wanted to keep them as clear and stirrable as possible. And I was like, well, what if I do the same thing with citrus juice? Well, in 2010 or whatever, when we started to really dive into weird stuff, when old fashions weren't cool enough to be on menus anymore, you'd see people. I remember we distinctly at a bar I was at, we had a drink called the Stirred Word, which was a stirred last word that just had the regular 3 ingredients with a little bit of citric acid in it. And that's sort of where the stuff started. We had a rough idea. Well, when it came time to keg, I was like, well, should I make that juice? Should I super clarify it? I could have at that point put it, there was the Spinzall didn't quite exist yet, but people were using centrifugal straining, and that could have worked. But we were talking about kegs here. This is a lot of product, which means that, yeah, I could run it through a centrifuge if I'm going to charge you $30 for it and serve it to you once. But if it's coming out of a draft handle for free because it's sponsored by Don Julio Coachella, I better find a better, cheaper way to do it. And it took me a long time to figure it out, because where I started was, okay, well, what is lime juice, right? And to give this a full lens, I'm going to talk about limes a lot in this, but that's because that's where it started. It's a lot easier to do with lemons. Everything I say is relevant for lemons as well. Just know that lemons are far more durable. You can be way more inconsiderate. So I like to talk and focus on limes because the flavor of lime is so sensitive. It's much more sensitive to oxidization. So if you can do it with limes, you can do it with all of them. It's not necessarily the other way around. Square is a rectangle kind of thing. So with that, we needed to figure out, okay, if we're going to make this juice, how do we make it? What do we make it out of? And at the time, there were products like Real Lime, if anybody's familiar with those, which is basically kind of what we make, except the quality of the peel isn't the same. And I tried to learn how they were making what they made. And so they have some acids that would be present. They have some sugar and a few other things, some flavors. And I was like, okay, that's fundamentally what's in there. And then I found a report from the FDA where they ran lemon and lime juice through a mass spec to say what's in them, period. And I was like, oh, cool. I found it. That's the chart. And that chart led me to have a much firmer understanding of what other than water was actually in there. And I also realized in the process while I was making it, you can take water, add the acid content, and it starts to really basically taste like the juice does. And that's because what we know is the flavors of lemon or lime actually come from the skin. Because if you want to make candy, as most people know fruit flavors, you either know it from a fruit that you can consume or you know it from the candy flavor. Everybody knows candy watermelon flavor. Everybody knows fake banana, that amyl acetate. Everybody knows that. We also know it doesn't taste like what they are. Well, with lemon and lime, you can kind of do that, but in order to get a flavor, the way they smell, which to humans is how they taste, well, that's the oil in the skin. That's a different story. That's not actually the juice. And if you take the juice, it's so sensitive that if you add heat to it, add oxygen to it, do anything like that, it's going to start to break down rapidly, which means that its flavor isn't going to last for the period of time you need to make it into a candy or make it into a whatever and still taste good. It's the reason that all pasteurized lime juice tastes like rusty crap is because it kind of is. It's when you pasteurize it, the heat that's necessary to do that causes it to oxidize. There's no way for lime juice not to oxidize. Lime juice is so sensitive that it'll oxidize in a 0 atmospheric pressure vacuum. It will do it all on its own because it's a breakdown of the structure of the skin. Lemons are a lot more durable. They won't do that. So with limes, you want to put a margarita on draft when Don Julio's paying you, you're not putting lemon juice in it. You have to put lime juice in it. So you have to figure out a solution. So I went, okay, let's figure it out. I know how much acid is in there, which acids should be in there, which acids shouldn't be in there. That's the big thing. And when we get into, I'm going to do a slight practical, because in my experience in the past year teaching this to people, it really helps to see a little hands-on. It's a new concept that's just adjacent of what we know. So it's like, it's familiar enough, but it feels like a hassle because you're not quite sure how it works. So I wanted to go through that today.
Well,
we'll get to the acids.
Like it's a skill where people know how to. I feel like it's a skill where people know how to use like a scale and they know like what like lime like peels are. But then you start introducing in chemical reactions that people may not necessarily understand.
Well, and it's it takes a little bit of it takes an hallucinatory imagination. You got to be able to kind of see it. I'm a very visual person in my imagination, and like because you're making a dehydrated product that you're going to rehydrate, you're kind of thinking 2 levels ahead. And because you have to think that way, I think sometimes it's difficult to get your brain around because you got to change your perspective a little bit and how you prep in the first place. Like, what are you actually making? Are you making juice? Are you extracting juice? Or are you making a concentrate to rehydrate? You have to, it's like when I train bartenders to make syrups, the thing I always tell them is you're trying to make sugar into a liquid, not sweetening water. We are trying to add as little as possible in our simple syrup to make that sugar into a water so we can mix it. We don't want to just try to sweeten water. We want to get as much as possible. And it's kind of the same idea. It's that change of perspective. We're not sweetening the water. We're making it in the first place. So we've got the acids. Normally, the 4 big acids are citric. Everybody knows that guy. Malic, she's amazing. Then we've got ascorbic. They're great, but not entirely necessary in what we're doing. And then we've got succinic. And succinic, as I mentioned a year ago, I will still say succinic acid is an agent of chaos. Succinic acid exists pretty much just to fuck up lemon and lime juice, because what it does is, pardon my, I apologize to the, I know, we all know how I talk. I apologize. So it causes, it's the catalyst that starts that whole reaction. Things will oxidize, certainly, without it. I shouldn't say it starts the reaction, but it accelerates it. So I was like, well, if I could omit succinic acid, if we don't taste it that much, and looking at this chart, it's like, well, that's the lowest on the totem pole. Maybe I could just get rid of it. And if I get rid of it, I won't have to worry about it anymore, and it's not going to oxidize. So I get rid of it. Doesn't oxidize. Okay, cool. I have this acidic thing that's sort of working with some juice. What else needs to be in there? Well, the hardest thing is going to be getting that dry palate flavor, because we can all do the pucker. Citric acid, we all love Sour Patch Kids, you name it. But that dry on the back of your palate acid, that's the hard one. Well, two things cause that: ascorbic and malic acid. Now, ascorbic is a great preservative, but it's more expensive. And as we'll get into with the acids we're using, it's harder to make in a mitigated waste fashion. I don't like to say sustainable because that's not entirely accurate, but it's hard to grow that acid. The other acids we are using, they're grown. So they're not waste products from other fruits that are just being used for that, fortunately. I mean, it would be cool if you could, you know, double down, but go ahead and convince Sunkist to do that. So we can leave ascorbic out because it's not the most ethical way to do that. And we have malic, and malic works just fine. It's also not a lot in there. There's only 8 grams in a liter of the stuff. So just a little bit to dry it out. Then we've got, that leaves us with citric, which obviously we need, and malic, which will give us the dryness. So you take those two acids, some water, obviously, and some people would tell you to add sugar. Don't add sugar. You don't need to add sugar. And when you run juice through a mass spec, it'll tell you that it has such a small amount of sugar that if you put it in there, it would be imperceivable. And it's also not covering anything up. It's in there because the plant uses it as fuel. It's not in there to make it taste better. That's not why it's there. And that shouldn't be your goal. You don't need to add sugar to this stuff. You won't need a centrifuge. You don't need a super bag. You don't need anything fancy. This is just good old-fashioned technique. So we've got water, we've got the two acids. Now we need extraction. Extraction's the hard part, right? How do we get that oil out of the skin? Well, I talked about it earlier. You can do Oleo Citrate. That works really well. But I also just got done saying I'm never going to use sugar in this. So how do I do it? Well, I thought about it for a long time. Some people, my friends Ian and Kelsey at Trash Tiki, they made stock. The problem with stock is that you're not only introducing heat, which will cause it to oxidize, but you're forcing the water, which is 1 part oxygen, to move quickly past the peels, which is going to cause it to oxygenate even faster, because you're causing the oxygen, lest we forget that water is 1/3, it's 1/3 oxygen. So that's 1/3 rust, basically. It has water there's a reason when you put a coin in water, it rusts. Well, the same thing would happen if you took a peel and put it in water. It will rust as well. It just only is going to rust to the taste. So we can't use heat. We can't use any of that stuff. So to be honest, I kind of scratched my head for a long time. I was like, well, I could use food grade essential oils, which is what I did, in 2014 when I started doing it, because that was the best idea I had. It's like, well, I guess I could get a rotovap and I could do all that stuff. But again, that goes back to the centrifuge. That makes it so that you can't do this everywhere. And the utility of this isn't just that it's a better tasting, longer lasting juice. It's that if you run a small program in Cambodia or Laos or Vietnam, like a lot of my friends do, and you don't have storage, you don't have refrigeration, this stuff's a lifesaver, because you can actually have 8 limes behind your bar and that'll give you a liter of juice for service. Come on, that's a big difference.
And that is a big difference.
Yeah, so I needed to find a way that I could do it that was still gonna work. It's like, okay, well, let's just go to the peels. What happens with peels? I put peels in the water, tried that whole thing. It still starts to oxidize because it'll sit there and go quick. And to go back to limes, what's neat about them is they have a little pH indicator on them. When you take them and they get too acidic or they start to oxidize, they brown. They start to change color, and they change from the outside in, which is extremely handy. It's a very, very useful tool for people like us. I will emphasize, I'll show you guys here in a second, but you don't need to zest these fruits. I've seen people doing that. That's going to take you forever. Just peel this with a Y peeler, like you peel a lemon or an orange or anything like that. You can peel a lime like that, and you definitely don't want to zest it. I had a friend, bless his heart, who uses it, and he was like, I really like the system, man, but I'm going to be honest with you. I feel like having to do this every day is kind of counterintuitive. And I was like, yeah, it is. That's not how I do it. I just use a regular feeler. So how does that extraction work? Well, that's where Oleo Citrate came into play. I figured, we've been told our whole careers, just like we've been told that fresh citrus is the most important thing. And it's important, but it was really important in 2010 when you needed to be able to tell who cared about their cocktails. Now, Buffalo Wild Wings has fresh lemon juice. It's not the same thing. It's great. It's really good to see. I'm glad the industry has changed towards that direction. There's also progress. We've also been told our entire lives that if you take any acid and you put it on a peel, it's going to ruin it right away, no matter what. Even if it's citric acid, something that's a really, really good preservative, it's going to destroy it. It's going to turn bitter. Don't even bother. So it becomes this blind spot to us, and we don't even think about it because we just, no, that won't work. I know that won't work. Pigs don't fly. It won't work. Well, I got really frustrated one day when I just hit the wall and could not figure out a good way to do this. And I was like, you know what? I'm going to make an Oleo Saccharum, and I'm just going to put all of the acid that's in the juice on the peels, and let's just see what happens. Maybe it'll eat them. Who knows what's going to happen? Worst case scenario. Well, I'm me, so I forgot about that for about 3 days. And I forgot that I had done it at all. And I was cleaning out the reach-in, and I grabbed it, and I was like, oh, shit, there they are. But the problem was that all of the acid had disappeared. All the powdered acid was gone, and the peels were really thick. And I was like, that is not what I thought was going to happen. So I took out an immersion blender and a liter's worth of water, and I blended it up into a liter's worth of Oleo Citrate, and that was the first batch. Because as it turns out, despite what we would tell ourselves, acid is a fantastic magnet and sponge for oil. It'll rip it all right out. It does it way faster. I mean, when we do the lime in service at room temperature, we're talking 70 to 72 degrees. I don't want to hear anybody say that room temperature is higher than that. You're a liar. It's not. I've heard 77 before, and that's a fucking lie. It's not 77 degrees. It's too hot. Again, I apologize for my language.
All good.
I'm so sorry. I won't do this later.
Clearly, this is a triggering thing for you, room temperature.
Yeah,
I wasn't prepared for
room
that.
temperature matters. Anyway, so you can peel it, and you can leave it at room temp, and it will start to turn in an hour on its own. It doesn't need any accelerated heat. It doesn't need any of that. Think about, it's funny because I'll meet friends who still do tinctures with Everclear in jars, and they'll just leave them, and that's a perfectly effective way to do it, but it is also sort of an antiquated way to do it. The ironic thing is think that when you're making this, just kind of set and forget, leave it. The way we do it at the beginning of service is our prep period's 2 hours long. You come in, first thing you do is peel. You make some peels, you throw them in the acid, you set them aside on the bar top, and you do everything else. And then when it's 2 hours later and you're ready to open, you have the juice done, you pour it in, you strain it, and you're ready to go. And it's like a really easy thing to set. You can also leave this stuff in the fridge. The Oleo Citrate, we call it slime and slemon, but if you take that, the citrate itself, before it's hydrated, you can leave it. After it's hydrated, you can leave it. If you hydrate it, take the peels out, because as I mentioned, you never want to leave peels in water ever for any reason, because when you do that, they're going to oxidize. It's the same reason that they oxidize sometimes when you put them in like tax-proof vodka, because it's 60% water. So a decent amount of that is actually just going to cause it to oxidize instead. I've seen people that were like, I put lime peels in my tequila and it turned out terrible. It's because 60% of it's water. Yeah, it's going to be pretty bad. But yeah, so all we need to do this is some water. We need limes, which I have in front of me. We need some acid. So citric and malic, those are the two. Those are the only two you'll need. Citric you can buy at any grocery store. But if you can't find it at like your neighborhood Kroger, go to your neighborhood like Middle Eastern store or like a Asian supermarket, anywhere where they tenderize meat with citric acid, they'll have it in big jugs. But
also everywhere there's a homebrew store now. Like you can find there's a homebrew store in every town. They always have that stuff for you.
Totally. And yeah, a lot of the weird stuff we end up dealing with, I think it's funny that it's always like homebrew equipment.
Yeah.
And malic acid, I buy that online. You can get it wherever you want. Just get food grade. You can buy it at supplement stores usually, but you're better off of buying large sums of it, because if you're going to move your program towards this, you should commit to it. And the easiest way to do that is, you can buy a 5-gallon. The shelf life on this stuff is like 2 years. And even after that, it just starts to lose its efficacy a little bit. So it's not like it spoils or turns. It's just not quite as acidic, which, by the way, one of the huge advantages of using this stuff is because the acid, the majority of the final product's acid is lab grown. It is so much better at denaturing proteins. Man, you get a Ramos, you can get 3 solid inches just right out the top, because it's just so strong. It's like concrete, and you have these activate people. you know, we love to look at the acid and be like, oh yeah, well, as a chemist, the acid, yeah, certainly, but that acid's pretty diluted. I can tell you as an amateur chemist that it's pretty diluted acid. It's not nearly as effective as it would be if we brew it in a lab because it's in a lemon. Like that's not its point of life. Its point of life is to be a part of a lemon. So it's never going to be like super strong and flavorful, which means that when you take it from a lab grown product, you end up with something that is a lot more impactful. I've had a lot of people that'll try the lemon juice and be like, wow, that is sour. It's lemon juice, but also it doesn't have more acid in it. It has more effective acid in it. So you end up with something that doesn't cause more heartburn or anything like that. But when it comes time to build structure or you need something to cavitate really effectively, it works really, really well because the acid is so present in there. So I've done a pretty good job of talking about how I got there and what Oleo Citrate is. Moberly, do we have any questions before I start peeling limes?
I guess like a good place to start before you start peeling limes is like a question that I think a lot of people will have is, you know, what is the real difference between an Oleo Citrate and super juice? Like what are the two things?
So I call super juice is the final product. So Oleo Citrate is just the it's basically I hate to use this word and I don't want to start to use it, but it's sort of the fake stuff. It's not fake though. It's just that's the technique side. So today, if I peel these 8 limes, I'll have enough lime material with my acid to make Oleo Citrate to the tune of 1 liter. But I'm also not going to waste the juice that comes out of these limes. So I'm going to take this fresh juice, which it's 8 limes. So we're going to have somewhere between 6 and 8 ounces of juice. I'm going to take that. They're pretty big. So they're like 180s. They're pretty big limes. So I pour that into the top and that mixture is what we refer to as super juice. But Oleo Citrate is the hydrated product.
How does adding the juice affect the shelf life of the end product?
It shortens it actually, but not a lot. Oleo Citrate is fine on its own. If you remove any of the oxidant plant material and you just leave it, we have discovered month-old lemon juice that didn't taste like 2-day-old lemon juice. You know, so it depends. But it shortens it. It doesn't shorten it that much because your final yield ends up being somewhere around the tune of 70 to 80% Oleo Citrate and about 20% fresh juice. So that fresh juice is going to oxidize at the same rate that it would normally because it has succinic in it. It has oxidant plant matter in it. So it's going to oxidize just as fast. However, realistically, you only have 20% of your juice oxidizing at 100% of the rate. So even after the 48-hour usual time limit for the shelf life of juice, at that point, only 20% of it has become oxidized. So you're actually looking at an oxidization flavor level of what you would see in juice that was maybe 6 or 7 years old. Okay. Listen to me. Yeah, so it shortens the shelf life, but not by a lot.
Okay, awesome. Yeah. And then are you going to go over the tools necessary?
Yeah, that's what I was going to do next.
All right, let's jump in.
Yeah, so the easiest thing, you need citrus. You need a Y peeler. I'm a Y peeler guy. You can use whatever you want, but I do use a Y peeler. You need citric acid. You need malic acid. You don't need this much of either. I just wanted to make sure I had enough. And then you need a juicer, which I have right over here, but we all know what those look like. Mine is a Santos top centrifugal juicer. It doesn't have a squeeze top or anything like that. Think like here, I'll just show you. It is right there. You see him?
Yep.
See my juicer? This guy. So it's just a really, really simple juicer. You don't need anything more sophisticated. You don't need you don't need a centrifuge. You don't need any of that stuff. And I'm not saying that like those, sorry, as I can't get my phone to stand up, I'm telling other people to use tools. And it's not like those centrifugal tools are bad. It's just that they're unnecessary. They're really cool, but for this specific task, you don't need them. It's a great way to clarify stuff you just won't need it here.
Before you jump into the peeling component of it, I know people are scared of Y peelers and
citrus,
you know what,
right? Yeah, and you know what's interesting? I was going to talk about that anyway because I have had a number of people tell me the biggest complaint about Oleo Citrate was not it tastes too good or lasts too long or doesn't cost me enough money, but those are big complaints. The issue is that I peel really fast, and what I learned is that I peel a little differently than a lot of people do. Like my entire staff has been like, "How do you peel like that? How do you not take your finger off? And how do you go so fast?" And that is the thing that does accelerate this as a prep process. If you are a slow peeler, this is going to take you a while for sure.
Well, so as someone who is a slow peeler personally, like I use like the OXO like side peeler, right? Like that's what I prefer just because I generally can't get a grip on it that won't take the tips of my finger off with a wipe peeler.
I'm not flipping off the camera, but I have this part of my finger, it just bends like that because I've taken it off so many times.
Yeah, I mean, like, it's like I have a similar story with the mandolin. But I would you show me how you hold the lime in your hand when you do that?
So the big thing is it's not just how I hold the lime, it's also how I hold the peeler. So a lot of people, when you peel, you'll take your peeler. Sorry, I'm trying to get oriented with the camera. You'll take your peeler and you'll pull, right? Stop doing that. Move the fruit. Don't move the peeler. It's a moving blade. Don't use a moving blade in your hand. Use a moving piece to go through the blade. So what I do is I hold the lime right here with this finger, like a trigger finger, and I use my thumb to stabilize the top of the peeler, and I just go like that. And that is also how you peel a lime without getting a bunch of fruit sticking through. Yeah, so you end up, God, this thing smells so good. But that's the big difference in how I peel. So I'll continue. Let me try to get that in the camera well. But yeah, so
no, that makes sense.
Yeah,
I feel like it's so counterintuitive.
It is.
Most people who peel, especially since peeling is just kind of part of our everyday like bar prep life, right? Or like one way or another.
Yeah, because it's like a muscle memory.
Yeah, exactly. So I feel like I'm gonna have to retrain myself to move my, because my I guess my right hand is because I hold the peel in my left. All right, cool.
Well, I mean, it's interesting because, you know, like I remember when I started this is some boomer stuff that I'm going to share, but when I started, you know, I was like, I had to use a Japanese bar spoon. I had to use like a 500 ml Uri, and I couldn't work if I hit the sides of the glass when I was stirring.
Right.
So like I learned from a person who was like, stop, you know, like the older school. So I think when it comes to technique, I've never even thought that I did it differently, but I definitely do. And I think it's a technique that we probably, Super Juice is very well personified as something that before didn't really have a technique that's finally getting a technique introduced to it. The way that I like to describe it to people is if you want a filet mignon, you don't feed a cow, chop it in half and squeeze it as hard as you can. You got to do a little bit more work than that. Well, the same is true if you want the best product this thing can make. If what you want is the best
visual, by the way.
Yeah, the cow just.
Yeah, all right.
We got a live GIF we can put into that.
Yeah, let's not do that. But
Jamie, pull that up. So yeah, it's, you know, it takes a little more technique, but that technique also yields a significantly better product. And part of the reason I call it Super Juice is all about these peels, because while it lasts longer, and that's great, that's just a byproduct of the Oleo Citrate. What's really cool about it is the flavor. When we make a margarita, you know, if you take a C-press, like a hand squeezer, make it that way, you know, like, where are you going to get all the oil in the juice? It'll be fantastic. No, you're not. You're going to get like 3% of the oil in the juice. And it will taste a lot better. That part's absolutely true. I'm not saying that's wrong. I'm just saying there's a better way to get that oil into the juice. And that's what we do. So in the same idea that if you had a margarita, say you make any drink, you make a sour, we're really weird about peels. I'm going to do a quick 5 minutes on peels. We're very weird about peels because we will spray them in a customer's eye or light them on fire or put them in our ear, but we won't put them in the drink when we make it. Why? We're obsessed with these garnish ideas that it has to sit on the top. That doesn't make any sense. Have you ever made a whiskey sour where you just put the peel in there? You can actually taste it. It tastes great. It's really good. You don't just smell it. You can taste it too because you actually put it into the alcohol where it's allowed to break up and start to smell really nice. So there's like, we have a lot of hangups on that. Old fashions. You'll put it in the glass. I'm not to be too much of an old man about this, but I've seen so many people that they'll put in 10 minutes of ceremony to like aromatize the glass properly. Just put it in the glass when you're making it. Just put it in the mixing glass. If you just put it in there, it'll taste just fine. You can just do that. And that's largely what we do. But garnishes, that's another but that's another tough discussion that I have to have with a lot of people about dehydrated citrus and stuff like that, about how that's maybe not the garnish that you're hoping that it is. We all get there. So with the peels, I think there's a desire for our drinks to taste like a daiquiri. You want to taste like lime juice. That's what it should taste like. That's ultimately what that drink is supposed to taste like. But most of the daiquiris you've ever had did not taste like that. They tasted like nice rum, but they should taste like lime candy with a little rum in it. So the way you do that is, if I take a lime peel and I express it, Well, there's a lot of controversial opinions on expressing lime peels. You'll have people, they'll go, oh no, your hands will catch on fire. It'll turn bitter. It'll be terrible. Haven't you ever had a shore runner? And I don't know if that's necessarily true. You do have to be more careful, but they don't really get that bitter. So if you do that, you end up with this drink that tastes really nice, like what you think it should taste like. Well, Super Juice has 6 of those peels for every ounce. So the reason that I call it super, or I say that you quintuple your flavor, is because realistically you do. If you were to take and flavor this to give it a lime flavor, we'd all give it 1 peel. I give it 6 in every ounce. That's because I'm taking this fruit, which has roughly an ounce of juice and roughly 6 peels, and that's what will end up into this final product. So you end up with something that's a lot more potent and a lot more flavorful than what we're used to. And it's kind of funny. I've had some people make comparisons. My buddy Owen Gibbler in Nashville gave me a little bit of static, and he said it's kind of like using sour mix nowadays. And I was like, well, yeah, kind of, except that this is like, if you could make sour mix ethically, and also, as I mentioned before, there's no sugar in it. It's just the technique. I think sometimes the technique, whether it's the new way to peel or it's just using this sort of dry process to make juice, I think a lot of it is sort of difficult to wrap your brain around, which is a lot of why I wanted to do like a live demo while I talked about it today. Because I think you can be like, hey, well, what about if you're going to do it this way? What about that? And I'm much more of a teacher like that. So as I go, feel free to ask me these questions, because you go, oh, the only other thing I left out, by the way, is that you will need a scale. Everything, you should have a scale. Honestly, I left out also the most important tool. I don't know how I could do this. And that's this guy. This is my favorite tool in the entire world. You've heard me talk about them. Everybody's heard me talk about them. You don't need a real blender. If you have like a blender, like a Ninja blender or a Vitamix or whatever at your bar, you just have to clean it. And we all know that cleaning those is a pain in the butt, even the ones where the blades come out the bottom. Well, it turns out that thing's just those blades on a stick. Those things are a lifesaver. You do want one for this because we're going to blend the peels. The thing that I learned, to go back to the story about them swelling, was, well, okay, how do I get it to my biggest, allow me to restart a little bit. The biggest hurdle was that oxidant pulp, because all of this stuff together, you have something that tastes fantastic, but it's clear. And it also doesn't have the texture, the mouthfeel that citrus does. We all know that citrus has kind of that softness, because there's a thickness to it. It's slightly more viscous than water. So I had to try to find something, and I just stumbled upon it. That was the final step. When I blended up those lemon peels that day, lo and behold, all that oil looshed. And when it all looshed, for those at home who don't know that term, looshing is what absinthe does. That's why it turns white. It's when oil turns opaque in the presence of water. It looshed, and it looshes the color that the fruit was. So our lime juice is green, and our lemon doesn't need a label green. You can look at it and is that cucumber?
It's Shrek
no,
green
it's just lime
for sure.
It's really green. And you get that with everything. The orange juice is really orange. The grapefruit juice, our grapefruit juice actually ends up being lighter because I really miss white grapefruit juice. That's actually one of the things, before we get into this, one of the final cool things about Oleo Citrate. I have a lot of friends that over the years have tried to fix orange juice. We all know the problem with orange juice. Everybody knows it. There's also a problem with grapefruit juice that we don't really talk about, and that's that Sunkist doesn't even grow white grapefruits anymore because everybody just uses ruby red. All the cocktails that we really like were made with white grapefruit juice because that would have been what they had in France, and that would have been the fanciest one to use. So a brown derby tastes very, very different with white grapefruit juice because there's flavors in there. There's more glutamic acid. There's flavors in there that are more akin to bourbon and honey than ruby red. So with orange juice, the problem is that it just kind of tastes like doo-doo. It doesn't really taste like anything it used to. It doesn't have the acid or the flavor. It's just sort of this juice. So when you're making it this way, because 20% of your yield is that fresh juice, or in this case, as I described, orange juice, you end up with a lot of freedom to change the way that it tastes, and you don't have to set up a whole new system of, we add acid to our orange juice so it tastes a little better. Because I totally understand why people do that. This lets you do it from the beginning. So rather than having an extra step where it's like, juice the orange juice, throw out all the oranges, get rid of everything, and then we'll add acid to it. No, let's just do it at the beginning. We'll use it with the peels. And the reason that orange and grapefruit took a while is because originally, again, this was built around limes, because limes, I would juice, like when I worked for Road Soda, I would do 60,000, 70,000 cocktails in a weekend. And that's a lot of limes, Bubba. That's a lot of limes. And it was before I had a good system for this. So I was mostly just juicing and throwing away or even composting. You can't compost that many limes because nothing will grow in it. It's too acidic. You have to split it up in like 20 compost piles for that to work. So you just end up with a bunch of waste that you can't use. And it was really infuriating because it was just such a wasteful process. And I needed to find something that worked better. But I didn't really focus on oranges and grapefruits because those weren't really being wasted. The peels were definitely getting used off of oranges and we weren't using the juice. We had the opposite problem with orange juice. And that was that unless you run, a free flow mimosa brunch, you probably aren't going through that much orange juice. Well, now we have a way to make it taste a little bit better and a way to control some of that flavor, which is really nice. In our bar, we have fresh fruit to use for garnishes, but we almost entirely prep everything beforehand. Like we have very little around because you don't need to. It's more useful. The way I look at it is if I take a moment and I control the prep and we put all this stuff together all at once, we can make our curacao and our super orange juice and our tonic and our grapefruit juice and everything all at once because they share a lot of the same qualities and ingredients. I think that's a thing that people who want to start a more environmentally conscious program run into is like, what do I do with this product or what do I do with this product? Well, a lot of times you can kind of combine them into stuff, but that does take changing your prep because you have to, rather than just buying a thing, cut it in half, squeezing it real hard, you've got to make sure you have the right part. Maybe you have to hang on to some of it. That means more storage. So there is definitely.
And it's scheduling too, because you're using an ingredient multiple ways and like it, you can't just make tonic syrup on a fly. If you're making everything, you're making everything.
Well, yeah, exactly. Everything takes a little bit of time. So it helps we could, but it would mean we also try to keep our refrigeration at a minimum. We run our entire program out of a keg fridge and one old vitamin water refrigerator. And that's because you don't need more than that. I was lucky enough to work in Hong Kong for a year, and I'm going to give everybody listening a tip. If you're ever in Asia, maybe don't order a draft beer unless you're in a really big restaurant because none of them have storage and they just keep the kegs on the floor. But what that teaches you, so I ran a world's best bar there, and the only thing we had was a fridge the size of that water fridge that I have here. You just learn how to work out of a really small program. So that goes back to what you were saying about prep. You can absolutely prep it all at once, and it helps with that space. So like sometimes you hang on to the stock, or we'll hang on to pith, or we'll hang on to skin or whatever. That starts to stack up in your walk-in really fast, or in our case, in a refrigerator, right? And that's in a quart container or something similar. It's going to stack up pretty quick. It gets unstable pretty quick, but I like it that way because it keeps us moving through stuff. You'll have everything done and somebody will be doing prep and pull up in the fridge and be like, oh man, we got a bunch of orange peels in here. We should make some curacao. And then we just make it anyway because we have it. It keeps you a little bit ahead of your pars sometimes if you have like an advantageous team, but that's a big if. I have a fantastic team who are incredibly advantageous, but I can't, you know what I mean? Like if you want to talk about a more reliable system that can work for everybody, you need to be able to change your scheduling a little bit and how you do this as well, for sure. Because the prep time doesn't take longer, but it's different, like I said, right? You rather than sitting down, cutting all your fruit, putting on your podcast or whatever and juicing away, you peel a bunch of it and then you go and do everything else. And that feels kind of weird. And I know for a lot of bartenders, the type of people who you couldn't pay once a month struggle if they have to stop in the middle of a task and go do another and that's not an insult to anybody. I'm the same way. If I have to stop in the middle of something and then go do something else, especially bartending, your attention might disappear. Then somebody might grab it. Somebody might come in. Who knows what's going to happen? It's really easy to forget that stuff. I mean, when I was telling the story, I said that I forgot, and that's how I made it to the final step. You know what I mean? It's really easy to forget this stuff. So I understand, and being able to do it right then and there helps so much. But it is a little shelf stable if for some reason your prep doesn't facilitate that. If you guys need to prep a bunch of citrate ahead of time, you can do so, especially the citrate. You could probably prep that a month in advance. Somebody's going to make me eat my words on that, but I know you could do it for at least 2 weeks because we haven't served a 2-week-old product, but we've had it and we know what it tastes like. And I can tell you that I could definitely serve it at like the local steakhouse. People would think it tasted good there, I'm sure, you know, because it's like it's oxidized, but it doesn't really. That wasn't really like a slight. I just mean that I think people's tastes when you're used to kind of like a more oxidized juice, something like that would still be really refreshing. And it's crazy because it's 2 weeks old. Right. It's just, and we're not, like I said, it's not like we're not goofing around here. There's no fancy science. This is a very like native approach to things. We're using what we got. We're using the most of it rather than just getting rid of it. Because, I mean, we won't talk about it too much today, but the pith that we get from every one of these fruits we take, and that's how we make our tonic. It's also how we make the base for our grapefruit juice. We take the pith and boil the pith down. That's the only thing we'll add heat to, because that is supposed to taste bitter. It's supposed to taste caramelized. You're looking for those flavors. And the thing that really knocks people's socks off is when you're making this stuff, the really frustrating thing for some people, I think, is when you're making grapefruit juice, you're going to want to add a little glutamic acid, 2 or 3 grams per liter. And that's because grapefruit juice has more glutamic acid than any other fruit. It has more glutamic acid than tomatoes do, in fact, which means they're more savory than tomatoes, specifically white grapefruits are. Now, there's a really easy way to add glutamic acid without having to go anywhere fancy. Would you like to guess what that might be, Mike?
No, you tell me.
Well, there's a really popular monosodium glutamate that most people are pretty familiar with. And if you didn't mind that little bit of salt, which at 2 or 3 grams in grapefruit juice is no big deal at all, it'll just taste good. I'm telling you right now in this official, I swear this is good science seminar, you can take a little bit of MSG and put it in your super grapefruit, and you achieve that savory component that you're looking for from grapefruit juice that's otherwise pretty unattainable.
And you got people just more hooked on your grapefruit juice. And I mean, most of the time you're making salty dogs anyway.
The only reason we love MSG in the first place is because it's salt and umami, and that's it. It's like, you like bacon? Have you ever had MSG? Because that's all that it is. When people put bacon salt or whatever on their popcorn, I'm like, just put MSG on your popcorn. That's what Buddhist monks do. They put a little MSG on the on their vegetables and stuff, so they taste a little more interesting. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So use that. Anybody who's listening to this, use that fun fact next time somebody tries to check you on MSG. Be like, listen, the Buddhist monks love it, so I don't want to hear anything about it.
Tomatoes is always my thing. Like, if you like, that's the most naturally occurring. Like MSG factory is a little tomato. So absolutely. And glutamic acid is an acid that kind of gets left out in these conversations because it's not in a lot of fruit. It's in grapefruits, it's in tomatoes, but by and large, it's not in citrus. It's not in pineapples. It's not in other stuff we come across. At some point, I'll probably come up with a super pineapple, but no guarantees. Because if I'm perfectly honest, pineapple's tough. It's really tough. So I have a question in here. Mm-hmm. And so what is the cocktail you notice the biggest difference in using this technique? Before we dive into the technique, which we need to do, what cocktails, like, what is this kind of like, I guess, built for in one way or another?
Dude, simple ones. I'm very much a utility bar guy. Like, I don't agree with a lot of things that Jeff Morgenthaler has to say, but he once told a lot of people in a very public fashion that for every new cocktail a bartender comes up with, they should know 10 classics. I agree with that wholeheartedly. There are so many. Your job is so much easier. You don't have to invent all these drinks. Somebody already did it. Just go find it, show them the respect of making it right. And those historic drinks, the drinks that I think sometimes you get to have a drink in a new way. I brought up the daiquiri earlier. Obviously, shines so bright in a daiquiri. Super lime will totally change your mind the first time you have a daiquiri with it. Any sort of drink like that, specific, daiquiris I revolve around a lot because, we all love them. Everybody's favorite drink is a daiquiri. A lot of people like to use an aged Spanish in that, which is fantastic. Make super lime, then use Eldo 3-year or something like that, and you'll see why it's made that way. Because that big vanilla, all that stuff kind of gets in the way of the beautiful lime, but the lime just usually isn't really there, so you can't taste it. But that, a Gold Rush, a Bee's Knees, anything where you should taste the lemon or lime, you're going to realize that you didn't before. You're going to taste it and be like, oh, this actually tastes like honey, lemon, and bourbon. It doesn't taste like honey, sour, and bourbon. It actually has a lemon flavor that's strong enough to cut through the honey, to cut through the bourbon, and not be perfumey. It's not sitting on the rim of your glass or anything like that. It's actually in the drink. And that makes it a lot more, I think, appetizing to drink. But those are the ones. Palomas, like Palomas. You want a drink that is super bright now? The Paloma. It's big and it's rich. Anything like that, Mexican Firing Squad, anything where there's a lot of other fruits involved, like a grenadine drink, a Jack Rose, anything that's going to have a lot of fruit where the actual citrus flavor would be really nice in that. Like a Clover Club is a great example. Clover Club is one of those drinks you do not taste the citrus in it. And it's a shame. It's only because of the other flavors. But when you really do get the citrus, the lemon, the vermouth, and that raspberry together, man, you want to talk about dynamite. They basically taste like a better version of the gin that's already in it. So when you have those types of really simple drinks, that's where the stuff really shines. And that, to me, is kind of like an endorsement of quality. Like, if I had to dress it up a lot, there would be a reason. Right. This can just be laid bare. You put it in a daiquiri and it's just going to blow your socks off.
Yeah, you can hide some like gross juice under, 2 ounces of chartreuse any day, but
yeah, for sure. No, this is, put it in the most simple drink you like, and you'll actually get to really taste that citrus fruit that's in there, which is the cool part.
Well, do you want to show us how to get at this?
Yeah, let's finish it off by doing that, huh? Okay, so the easiest thing, I suppose, is the peels. The peels, let's see if I can just...
I mean, it is if you are like a peeling machine like yourself.
Yeah, so what we're going to do is peel these off. I'm going to throw them over there.
I like the danger zone of your slatted top here.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. It is shelves from outside. I had to go, my construction table, my normal table for this sort of thing is upstairs in my studio, and my internet is terrible up there. I wanted you guys to actually be able to see this. So as you're seeing, this is just me peeling, and like, see how I'm moving the fruit instead? It's so much safer. The peeler never comes near my fingers because my fingers are here. So it just never, like, it would have to cut somehow through this finger to even get to this finger.
Well, it's like cutting with your knuckle out. You know what I mean? Like it guides and guards a little bit.
Yeah, exactly. So this is the same idea. And you just peel, you can see me doing it here, but I've done 2 already. We're going to do 8 total, but this is to do a liter, This is, it's a liter plus. It's a liter of Oleo Citrate plus whatever juice you get out of it. And like I said, that usually comes out to, if you do 32, like if you do a quart, you'll end up right around 40 ounces because you end up with somewhere between 6 and 8 ounces of juice, again, depending on the size of your fruit. So
how much are y'all prepping at Expo for like a weekend?
It's about the same as you would normally prep for a bar. So we'll do, 2 or 3 liters of each per night. We're not a huge bar, so we don't go through huge numbers. But if you were to want to scale this to a nightclub or whatever, it'd be easy.
It's a pretty big bar. It's not small by any stretch.
No. I just mean like there are people, if you talk to the guys at Mother's in Nashville, they're going to go through 4 times what we go through. But they also use super juice, and they have, rather than having cases sitting on the floor, you end up with just a little bit. Like, one of my big gripes, I won't get into it too much, but since you have me here peeling, the problem with dehydrated citrus as a garnish is that you don't buy limes one at a time, and you don't buy lemons one at a time. You buy them 2 or sometimes 300 at a time. If you're buying 2 cases of 150s or something. And if you dehydrate these, you have to use energy to do so. If you didn't peel them beforehand, they're going to curl up, which a lot of people don't like. You can weigh them down to stop that, but you do need to peel them first. Most people won't use waste fruit, and the juice is more useful in the first place. So if you take this garnish and you say you cut up this lime and you manage to waste 2 lime wheels, fresh lime wheels at the end of your evening, well, that's not really a big deal because it's 2 little lime wheels from 1 lime. But if you cut up this big bunch of limes and then you just hang on to them forever, it's a lateral move. You're not really changing it. And unless you're very, very bad at your like garnish pars, or your bars fluctuates a tremendous amount, you really shouldn't have an unpredictable amount of garnish every night. We all know how a P-mix works. We know how garnishes go. So like, you don't really need to be able to have all this fresh food around. And to dehydrate it is to sort of lose the point. Like, yeah, it does make it more shelf stable, I guess. It can still mold. It still does degrade. And also, what was in there is what you wanted. Didn't you buy it for the juice? If you bought it for the juice, don't turn it into a garnish. Make it into juice and make it into as much juice as possible. And then, like we do, we will take the pulp matter and some of the other stuff. If you want to take this pith when it's done, boil it 5 times. And in between each boil, dump it in an ice bath. By the time you're done, all it's going to taste like is marshmallow. Do whatever you want with it. Make a garnish out of that. Make a slurry. But there are a lot of other options using the pulp to make gummies. There's a lot of other options that we can have to make garnishes that don't have to be lime wheels. Like the problem is that it's a lime wheel, not that it's a dried lime wheel or a fresh lime wheel. The problem is that we used a piece of lime to decorate a glass. That's the problem. Right. And because you don't order them in small amounts, you also end up with, you know, cases that'll start to rot. Everybody knows case rot. Everybody knows that stuff. And pars are a lot easier to get right when you can make the orders smaller. So we don't even we also are able to buy this from somebody. We don't have to go through Cisco. We can actually buy from somebody. So if you're lucky enough to be like California or Florida, where you might have a local citrus farmer, if all you need for your week is, you know, 8 times 5, 8 times 6, 8 times 7, whatever, you need 40, 50 limes, you can go get those in a bag from a local farmer, and you can support someone directly instead of getting a big old case from Cisco, having to buy a walk-in to put that case in, and all the other trouble that comes with it. It's just not really worth it. In my opinion, this is a significantly more communal way to do it as well.
So
okay,
you've peeled your limes.
I peeled my limes.
Very quickly, now, I might add.
Yes. I try to keep it quick. I can't talk about it like that, not keep it quick. By the way, if anybody watching has any questions about how I peel, feel free to ask. I don't actually know how to teach it all that well, to be perfectly honest. I just know that I do it a little differently. And I will show anybody who wants to see how I do it, and they can try to learn it. But the big thing is move the fruit. The fruit's the big thing.
When I have a big old gash out of my finger, I'm going to be sending you a text message. Let me tell you what.
And I'm going to be like, did you move the fruit or did you move the peeler? Because if you can't cut your hand if you move the fruit. See what I'm doing? See, guys, you can't cut your hand if you do that. I'm touching it. You got to go through. You have to pull through. Anyway. So it does fluctuate slightly between lemon and lime, the amount of citric. The Malic is the same. The difference between lemon and lime with citric is 3 grams per liter. So here's what I'm going to say to you formally. It is supposed to be, for lemon, 47 grams per liter, and for lime, 44. If you, however, can tell me you can taste the difference between 44 and 47 grams in a liter, you're probably incorrect. So if you find yourself in a very high volume situation where maybe you need to pre-batch the acid, so it's just pour acid into peels, so your bar back maybe has an easier job, or your opening bartender does, you can absolutely call it even at 45. I have extensively at this point over the course of the year tried to see if there was a huge difference, and there really isn't. I think it just comes down to the fact that mass spec is incredibly accurate, and it's a lot more accurate than a human palate is. So that means that you end up with something that we all have technical things that we know are a little too, like ice. There's a lot of technical ice information that's not really applicable. I think that's kind of the case here. I think while they are different, and like I said, lemon is 47. We have the slides for these, but lemon is 47 and lime is 43 or 44. I will tell you that we're talking about gram weight. It's not a huge difference. And if it's not, you taste it and you tell me what you think, but it's not a huge difference. And it's entirely, I think, fine to use 45 grams of citric acid for both lemon and lime, if you feel so inclined. If you want to get it exactly right, like I said, it's 44 for this, or 43 for this, and 47 for lemon. But we have the slides for that sort of stuff too, just so you guys know. Okay.
Yeah, and the slides will be copied into or posted into the Facebook and YouTube, but I am going to get them on a banner here real quickly.
Awesome, thank you. And you can always go to our bar's Instagram, that's bar_expo, and we have it on there as well.
Yeah, if you don't want to copy this long link here, you can go to bar expo. Find it.
Whatever's easier for those that are looking to learn. So we've added our 44 of that. Now we're going to add. Oh, we got some clumps here. I'm gonna add. This is our Malic. We're going to add 8 of this. Okay, and then it's as simple as shaking it up. You know, you want to look at it. You want to make sure that it's got a nice distribution. You know, you want them all to look pretty powdery. The reason this is nice to do at room temperature is because at room temperature, your fruit is going to do what I like to call sweat a little bit. It's not obviously physically sweating, but there is oil coming out of it because the oil has reached a temperature. Most oil comes out of fruit when the temperature changes. Like when you're in the desert and you can smell that desert rain smell, that's creosote. The oil comes out of the leaves because the barometer changes. Kind of the same idea here. So because the humidity is a little different in this room, the oil's coming out, and hopefully, yeah, you can kind of see how it's sticking to the peel there.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. So you've got like this nice coated peel, and we'll leave this. I mean, I'm not going to make everybody sit here for it, but we'll leave this for about an hour. As, like I said, limes, they'll start to oxidize. So you'll start to see the green turn to brown here. And as you start to get yellowing and browning, that's when you want to pull it. The easiest way to tell is at the bottom if it's become hydrated. So right now you can see that it's all just powder. That's all soft powder. As the oil comes out, it'll start to hydrate. And if anybody here has ever made an Oleo sacrum, you'll understand what that looks like. It looks just like an Oleo sacrum. It's kind of why I call it that. Because while it works in a really similar fashion, it also ends up looking like that by the time you add it to anything else.
It's pretty evident too, like, because the peels really do start to break down. Like, I've made it a number of times, and it really, like, you definitely can tell when it's time. And it is like not only the visuals, but it's like the texture.
And if you leave the lemons when they get like almost transparent, those lemons, you can just eat them. Take them out. They're really cool. The acid like negates all the bitterness, and you end up with something that, while it's kind of sour, just is sort of sweet and nice tasting. So I'm sure there's more room by any means. Like, I'm doing this, but I'm doing it while I run a bar and do all this stuff. I can't just focus on this. By all means, guys, play with this. Take the peels, take them out, let them sit in the acid, then take them and dehydrate them. See what happens. Like, there's a lot of other stuff. There's a lot of fertile ground here to play with. This is just the basics of how, for now, you can make a better, stronger, longer lasting juice. But I think in terms of like the secondary products that you create, there's a lot of potential here, like a lot of potential.
So I guess I have like one last kind of like question, because I think we're going into that season of to go again.
Yeah.
As we're cooling down and, people are doing holiday drinks, little pop-ups, things like that. How does this apply to to-go programs? Because that's how I used it, like during COVID. I used it a lot.
Yeah, it got that treatment a lot. I think for a lot of people, for yourself included, it's a new idea. And I think putting the quality of your program feels a little bit on the line. Again, we've been told our whole lives that fresh is best. There's nothing better than the juice that comes out of that fruit. I'm here to say that's not true. I don't think it's true. I'll happily talk to anybody. I've spoken to a lot of food scientists about this. They agree with me. We've all come to the conclusion that you can make it better. It's all about technique, and it's all about what the definition of better is. How do we use it? What are we using it for? But the reason that I wanted to emphasize that you don't use any tomfoolery, there's no 22nd century technology involved. It's quite the opposite. This is like a very 18th century solution, which is kind of how a lot of our solutions in this business were sort of developed. And that's because they were created at a time when those were the best practices. So I tried to keep that in mind. So it works. I say all that to say that it works very well for anything you want to make, but it's fantastic for to-goes. Whether you're kegging or to-goes, I know that Mace was using it for their to-go and keg and draft program, and there's a handful of others as well. And that's because if you're doing that, you can just use Oleo Citrate, first of all. Like, if it's a to-go drink, you're better off doing that. Here's the perfect, honest truth. My Oleo Citrate, in every measurable metric, tastes, feels, and lasts better than real juice does. And that's a weird thing to say, because I was going to call this seminar Reinventing the Lime Wheel, because it just kind of feels like one of those things that we overlooked, so we didn't worry about reinventing it until now. It's weird that I'm doing this now. It feels like something that when I started in 2008 should have already been an option.
Right.
So I think there's a lot of stigma around it. But if you just want to just use the Oleo Citrate, which, again, doesn't have sucanic, has better acid, has better flavor, has better clarity, use that in your draft cocktails. Use it in your to-goes. Your to-goes, if you send this in your to-go, this is a to-go cocktail that they can leave in their fridge for weeks. This isn't a to-go cocktail that you got to tell them, go home and make this. Leave it in your fridge. Carbonate it. Leave it in the fridge. Leave it in there for months. It'll be just fine. It's a product that's more than shelf stable. So if it's refrigerated, it'll be good forever.
I was using it to make bourbon and sweet tea to add the acid component and canning that. And I had people opening that like months. I was concerned. I was like, "Ooh, okay, was it good?" And they were like, "No, I couldn't tell the difference from the first one I opened to this one." And I was like, "Okay, so apparently my canning rig works, and so does this methodology." So that's a good test there.
If the two of us goons together can create a system that works like that.
Yeah, so I mean, I definitely think that there's a world of application. Nick, thank you so much for sharing this with us today. Like I said, if you want to find more information, you can head to Bar Expo, that Instagram there. They have all the recipes are there. That's where you can see what mad science is happening over there with buzz
I
buttons.
also handle the social media, so if anybody wants to just send the bar a message through there, I answer messages about Oleo Citrate and Super Juice all the time. It's kind of a red phone line for that. So if you have a question about it, feel free to just shoot the bar message. It's
The
honestly
Batman
the
phone?
Ask Moberly. It's the fastest way to get a hold of me. This
That
guy
is
knows
true.
me on a personal level, and it's the easiest way to get a hold of me.
That's real life. But if you have any other questions, please shoot them there or ask them in the comments. We'll make sure they get over. Thank you so much for your time.
Of course.
This is
Thank you.
amazing. And if you are watching this at home, if you enjoyed this class, make sure you make sure you share this, because this stuff is what's necessary. The only way we can share it, or the only way we can get it out there, is by sharing it with our friends. So if you know somebody's bar program who could benefit from this, just shoot it to them via Facebook or Instagram or YouTube, any of those things. And you can follow us on all those. Make sure you follow us at PDX on Instagram. We got a whole month of great programming coming up, some really cool stuff. We got a class tomorrow with Danielle Goldtooth. I think it's going to be amazing.
Yeah, that's going to be a really cool class.
It's going to be a really cool class. And we got a lot to follow there. Make sure you too, there's, sign up for American Whiskey certification. That's coming too. So we got all kinds of great stuff coming. Nick, thanks again. I really appreciate you.
Yeah, dude, absolutely.
We'll see you guys
Have a
next
good day.
time.
Thanks, everybody.